Hi, it's time for another episode of The Artist Within. Today's guest is fine art model Kristy Jessica. Let's get this show started. So, you are a fine art model. When did you first come into the knowledge of what that is?
So I started modeling for fun when I was 18 years old. And it was at the time mostly an act of self-expression. I was finding photographers online, and I'm going to date myself now because back then it was like through uh, MySpace. So I was finding photographers that wanted to do creative stuff with me. And growing up, I got to rewind even farther. I was really in sort of a like oppressive upbringing in a strict religious household with a very sort of like militant, organized father. And I have two younger sisters, and the three of us um, we weren't really allowed to express ourselves like through our clothes or like our bodies or anything that was remotely sensual at all. It was like heavily shunned. So as soon as I turned 18 and people started contacting me on the internet, I was like, yeah, I want to do this. Yeah, I want to do that. Body paint. Yeah, totally. So I was getting really excited about creative concepts and like working with other creative people to make cool photos. And so there's all sorts of genres of creative modeling that I've done as a way of self-expression. And I've sort of gone through like over the course of several years, it's been 15 years now. I'm 33 years old and I'm still doing it. And I've sort of kind of on a metamorphosis of, different genres, working with different types of photographers here and there. And I've like changed my nickname and I've changed my platforms here and there. And so it's been a long journey.
So, you said at 18 you just started doing it, and you didn't have any fears of rejection or fears of it's not going to work. What was the encouragement to do it regardless of what people might have said? It's better just go to college and get a regular job. What was it that said, I'm going to do this?
Well, initially, when I first started, I did not think that I was going to be making money at all. I was just doing it as kind of um, a way to express myself and do something creative that I was always curious about. I would definitely had lots of fears. Just the idea of being in front of a camera gave me like a huge sense of anxiety initially because I'm only 5'2" and I have these stretch marks. And I at the time, around the time that I was like communicating with photographers about modeling for them, the TV show America's Next Top Model was really popular. And I really liked watching it, but all the models on that show were like, at least 5'10", and they were working for agencies. And the photo shoots that they did were really high end. I don't know if you ever seen or heard of that show, but
Yeah.
there's a celebrity host. They do like all these different styles of photo shoots that they're always creative. They've always got some kind of theme. And I was just like, that's so cool. I want to do that. Like, pour honey on me or something like that. Just whatever that's interesting and fun to do that like turns into something that you can share with the world that's like beautiful or emotive or just curious imagery. So I thought at the time that if I was going to try to be a model, that I had to do what the models on America's Next Top Model did. And that's the only idea that I had that true modeling was. And that's also the messaging that was reflected with all of my friends and family and peers and, social media and stuff. People were telling me that I had to be like represented by an agency or published in a mainstream magazine in order to call myself a model. And so I started a profile on a site called modelmayhem.com after the first year or so of just kind of randomly finding people to work with on MySpace and Craigslist, which has its own set of interesting characters and experiences. But I made a portfolio with pictures like that I had collected of myself on Model Mayhem. I also had printed out like a book with a bunch of like photos that I've done like for the first couple of years that I was modeling, and I was going on Craigslist and trying to find go-sees or like places where I can apply to like work for an agency, and they're like all scams on Craigslist. So I kind of like flew into it, just like pedal to the metal, and like didn't know anything about scams. I had all kinds of scams come at me, and I had to learn about them the hard way. I had to learn about like weird people who are lying about what they're doing with their photography, and then they're trying to make you do something you're not comfortable with when you're there at the shoot. So I had insecurities about my height and like scars on my body, because I thought I didn't really wrap my mind around like what photoshopping was. I just saw, you're checking out at the grocery store and you see like some, fashion magazine, and the models are all perfect looking. And I was like, well, I have to be perfect. And so I have to hide any imperfections. I didn't really like, I grasped what Photoshop was, but I thought that I had to be perfect in order to model for somebody. So that took me a long time to get over.
Well, so you basically had to create your own roadmap on this way. What were, you said you unfortunately scams, but what were some other things you learned along the way that you can give tips to someone who's starting out?
Yeah, that's a really good question. There have been a lot of people who got in touch with me over, several years, asking about advice on like how to get into modeling and what to look out for. Safety is always the most important thing. Checking references on the people who contact you to work with you is like the most important. But because there's not a good system on the internet in place to like review photographers, there like the best place that there was is Model Mayhem, but unfortunately that website, they started, they changed the way they charged their members, and a lot of people jumped ship. So now people are booking shoots through Instagram and Facebook for and TikTok too now, for a lot of the freelance creative work and like, promotional for independent companies type stuff. A lot of people just find models and photographers online just through social media. There are like agencies, but the reason I've never worked with an agency is because they can be controlling. They can restrict what you do on your personal social media in order so that you reflect their brand. Some agencies don't. Some agencies do. Like Suicide Girls is an agency of like creative nude models who are generally like alternative and look, like tattoos on their body and stuff. But they have a really strict contract where for 2 years you're not supposed to do any paid work with other photographers. I think that eventually they changed that, but for a long time when they first were popular, they had like super strict rules in their contracts for the models. So if I would give advice to anybody, I would say if you're going to sign a contract, make sure to like look over it and don't ever just like submit to somebody else's will just because you think that you're gonna make it by following what they say, because so many people will try to take advantage of a young person's naivety, and I was so naive. I there's a lot of photographers that have a camera and they'll try and say stuff like, oh, once so and so shot with me, they later on went off and they became a famous published model, and they got into Playboy and all this stuff, and they take credit for that, and they say, oh, I photographed her and then she got famous, so you should shoot with me. And then they invite you to their like basement studio, and they're like, here, like bend over on this chair, stupid stuff like that. So getting references on photographers today is a little bit more complicated, because you have to go and look at their social media and see the other models that they photographed, and then find out who that model is and contact them and say, hi, I'm going to work with so-and-so photographer. I see you are in his portfolio. Were you comfortable when you shot with him? Did you feel respected? So it is a little bit of homework, but over the course of time, now I've started to recognize like regular other full-time freelance models in people's portfolios that I have their cell phone numbers now. and I can just text them and be like, hey, here's a screenshot that you did with this photographer. Like, do you remember the shoot? Like, how was it?
Cool. Cool. So how has it been since the pandemic for you? With obviously you definitely stopped working in March of 2020, but did
Yeah.
you have you been able to get back up and working?
Yeah. So fortunately, I have started working on self-portraiture like years before, and I'm able, over the course of several years, starting in like 2013, 2014, I got more serious about promoting my brand online. Um, I guess I should sort of, I'll get to the pandemic question in a quick minute, but to set up for that answer, I have to kind of describe a little bit more of my journey. So, primary source of income for a long time was photographers hiring me for my hourly rates, which requires me to be there in person for a set amount of hours and, you know, get paid at the end of the shoot. In 2015, I started a Patreon account where I started blogging about my travels and including behind the scenes content and sharing like photo sets of images that like I had permission to use. And I needed more content for that on a regular basis. So I started doing self-portrait photography. I have my own Sony cameras, and I've been over the course of several years like collaborating with photographers who also use Patreon. So there's sort of this subculture of creative photographers that are trying to make a little bit of side money by starting a Patreon page, and other models who also have Patreon. It's mutually beneficial for us to collaborate with each other because we'll give each other the rights to use the images on each other's platforms. So if a photographer hires me for my hourly rates, generally the agreement is I don't get like access to any images unless it's for social media or portfolio use, not for resale somewhere else. If somebody pays me for a photo shoot, I can't take those pictures and make money off of them on my own like websites. That's a big no-no in the industry. Like, it's a huge thing. It's a copyright issue. So since I've started like a side hustle in 2015 of generating my own income over the course of a few years, my income from Patreon has sort of like leveled up. And because of that, I've been able to reduce the amount of in-person paid shoots that I have to do on a frequent basis. For example, when I was touring the most frequently between 2014 and 2018, I would be gone for 10 to 14 days in a row, and I would have 2 or 3 shoots a day for like up to 2 weeks in like 2 or 3 different cities. I would pick like cities that were next to each other, like Houston, Austin, and Dallas, or like Philadelphia and New York, and I would fly there, rent a car, and then go to all the shoots that I've set up for myself through online that I've been preparing for a few months for every trip. And that was my primary income. With making income off of Patreon, I was able to shorten those lengths of those trips, and I could do like 6 to 8 days in a row. And eventually it was like 4 or 5 days in a row. Because those trips are really exhausting. You know, modeling can be really exhausting. I do a lot of like almost contortionistic poses in a lot of my photo shoots, and it's tough if you're wearing shoes that are bad for your feet, like high heels or something like that. Or there's a lot of shoots where I'm climbing on rocks or trees, or I'm in cold water. I do a lot of underwater modeling, so it's very like taxing on the body, and sometimes very emotionally taxing depending on the photographer. So I've been able to pick and choose the types of photo shoots that inspire me more. And then the pandemic hit. So when the pandemic hit, I was like, all right, I have to rely mostly on my online sources of income. So I've focused really hard on that. And fortunately for me, about 2 months, or no, a little bit before the pandemic hit, I had already started a Patreon, or sorry, not Patreon, an OnlyFans. So I have one of those as well that I put the same content that's on my Patreon, like my self portraits and my behind the scenes, and I also do creative videography and creative editing. Um, so I put that also on my OnlyFans and on my Patreon, and I kind of recycle the content. So I have a lot of people who donate like per month to help supplement my income. But a lot of other models who are in the industry, who are my friends, they don't have Patreon or OnlyFans. They don't have online sources of income, and they were struck really hard with the pandemic. A lot of them started doing virtual photo shoots. So that requires the model to have her own camera and to set it up with a Wi-Fi connection, and a photographer that's, you know, somewhere else in the world can control the settings and push a button.
Okay.
And so they're doing the photo shoot, but the model that's setting it up is doing a lot more work than she would have had to if she were just the model and not also setting up the work. But that's, with the pandemic, virtual photo shoots has become massively popular. So it is a way for people to creatively collaborate. Because I'm more successful with my self-created content, I haven't gone the virtual photo shoots route, but I see a lot of my friends doing that, and I'm always like, that's awesome. Like a photographer friend of mine just worked with a model who's in Australia, who he never would have been able to work with. And because of the pandemic, like, he has images of her in his portfolio that, you know, they worked together on a concept and they put something cool together, and now they can share their work. So it has been kind of a struggle. I've gone through like different life changes that I also incorporate into my modeling, and I incorporate it in my blog. And up until recently, I was incorporating everything that's going on with me and how it affects me and how it affects my work in my YouTube channel. My YouTube channel just got terminated, unfortunately, but in 2019, I left my apartment life and I moved into this RV van, and I've been traveling via the van to photo shoots across the country. And my boyfriend lives with me in the van, and he takes a lot of the pictures of me. So we go to beautiful locations in nature, and we'll do like some kind of a creative photo shoot and that we can share. So my Patreon and OnlyFans is like helping pay for the gas and the expenses and the RV parks and everything. So everything that I do is kind of going right back into like the creation process of like how my life works. And so my whole entire life is very like intertwined with my modeling. Some other people who are aspiring models or like newer to modeling ask me like, how do you get to the point where you're traveling and doing this all the time? And a big hurdle for a lot of people is having something that keeps you at home, like having pets that you have to take care of, or if you're married and have kids, or have really high expenses and have another job. I've over the course of time been able to like release myself of paying rent at an apartment. So I just pay for the payment of the RV that I have. And I've sort of traded like other aspects of my life, like a social life, for doing this. So I'm very much all in.
Awesome. So going back to the traveling, where exactly, name some places you remember, and I guess the most memorable places you've traveled.
Well, prior to the pandemic, I used to fly a lot more. I've only been on like 2 airplanes in the last year, and that was to a location and then back. And that was about a month ago. But prior to that, I've been to a lot of places. I've been to Australia. I've been to Singapore. I've been to Turkey, Croatia and Italy, Mexico, and then many of the United States. In the last year and a half since I've moved into this van, I've gone through Utah like 5 times because there's so much amazing nature out here. I'm in Utah right now. We're parked in Moab, and there's, you know, arches and stuff. I've been to Florida, Texas, New York, Pennsylvania. I'm originally from the Pacific Northwest in Seattle, so Washington, Oregon, California. I don't think I've actually done a photo shoot in Idaho, but there's some areas where there's not very many photographers. So I've sort of when I'm trying to find people that want to create with me, I'll put like a travel notice online. I have a newsletter, like just, my own newsletter that I made, and all of my social media, and then my Model A Hemp profile I still use. And that's how I find people. I'll just put a casting out saying, I'm going to be in these cities during these dates. Like, does anybody like have any projects that they want to work with me on? And so it's been a lot less. I have had like the first 3 or so months of the pandemic, I had no photo shoots with anybody else at all. And then I started traveling again because I need to do this in order to make an income. So for starting last June or July, I started, I hit the road again, and I only had very few actual photo shoots with other people. And I had really strict rules about photo shoots. It had to be outdoors. The photographer had to be within like beyond 6 feet of me. And the photographer could not be the type of person who is an anti-mask wearer or works in a place where there's a lot of people that, work. Like if you worked photographing weddings or something like that, then I would be uncomfortable working with them. There have been a few situations where the photographer had a COVID test within a couple of days before we shot, and that made me comfortable enough to like work with them. Lately, in the last few months, a few studios have been opening up that are following guidelines where they sanitize all the surfaces in between all people, and they have a very limited amount of people allowed in the studio at any time, and they require everybody to wear masks except for the model when she's on set. So I feel comfortable in those situations, but my partner and I, who travel together, we get COVID tests as we travel about once a week. And so I share a screenshot of my most recent negative COVID test to anybody that I'm about to shoot with. So at this point, like my life and my income have to move on in order for me to continue to survive. So I'm very careful. We don't like see or interact with people except for like buying groceries. So it's been kind of a challenge, but we make it work, and we're as careful as we can be. And we get tested, and we share our negative results with anybody that we're going to interact with. And anybody that I'm going to interact with, like photographers or beyond, I pretty much interrogate them and ask them like, have you been to any like bars or restaurants recently? Do you wear masks at the store? Like, do you sanitize your hands? It's kind of annoying, but I've gotten used to the habit of going through this interrogation with everybody as we go traveling.
So when you travel outside of America, is there ever a language barrier or a problem as far as communicating with other people?
There, like I'm like pretty okay at Spanish. So any of the times that I've been to Mexico, I've been able to communicate. Most photographers who work with me speak English pretty well, but the only times that the language barrier is somewhat of an issue is overseas, like Europe, like Greece and places like that. There's occasional times where the people who are in the Uber that you're riding in aren't fluent in English, but it seems like it's become more and more standard if people are working with tourists or travelers, like people who work in a hotel or a taxi. It seems like it's becoming more common that people know English, or at least know enough to like get you where you need to go or like help you with what you need. Restaurants, I mean, I even before the pandemic, I don't really go to restaurants very often. I've been more like, I mean, I like restaurants, but I travel with like, snacks and food with me everywhere I go. Prior to moving into this camper van, and prior to the pandemic, I mostly was alone every time I traveled for modeling. So wherever I stayed, I was just kind of like doing my own thing in between photo shoots. So I wouldn't really be like out and about acting with the world and stuff. But most photographers who I've worked with have known at least a little bit of English, at least enough to communicate to do the shoot.
Cool. So last question I have for you Is there a project in your head that you would like to work on that you haven't yet, that you would think would be amazing artistically to work on?
Yeah, I'm really inspired mostly by unique things in nature. So when I find out about a unique nature location, I want to go there and come up with a creative concept like along the nature. And the one place in the world that it's going to be really hard and really expensive for me to get to, due to the flights and I'll have to purchase a flight to Africa and then take a train or a taxi for 8 hours or something like that into Ethiopia, into this area called Addis Ababa. And from there, there's a tour. In order to do the tour, you have to also have a military to guide the tour because the area can be dangerous. There's a place, it's called the Danakil Depression, and it's one of the hottest places in the world, but they have these lime green acid pools, and the ground is like neon orange and yellow and red. So if you can visualize like puddles of green with like crazy orange and yellow everywhere, like it's the craziest looking place in the world. And I just feel like going there and doing something, whether it's like I'm a drone cinematographer, so I like getting aerial photography. I would love to go there and like do some kind of a narrative with like long flowing silks or something like that in that location. I feel like it would just be a really beautiful way to show one of the most amazing places in the world that's in Ethiopia that nobody ever thinks of going to, or not very many. I've seen some photos of tourists standing along the edge of it, and I know that it's like safe enough to go there, though you can't go into the acid.
Right.
It's a very dangerous place, but I think that the danger is also a little bit like enticing to me. It adds a little bit more excitement. So that, accompanied with the beauty and the uniqueness of it, make me feel like the imagery would be like impactful. Like, wow, I've never seen that place before. Like, coupled with like some emotive posing or some crazy headstand or something like that.
You're watching the artist. You're watching the artist within. That is all the time we have for you today on The Artist Within. I'd like to thank our guest, Kristy Jessica, for stopping on by and sharing her journey with us. And of course, you, the audience, as always, thank you so much for watching. Have a good day. Have a good week.